Alright, so in effort of keeping this pretty simple, I won't be going into many of the uses of Blender. It's just basically how I use it to reduce the size of the videos. Now, of course, it is rendering it out again, so you have to factor that into whether or not it's worth it for you. But if you have internet like I do, it might very well be. So you'll open it up, you'll get something like this. Splash screen, then you get a cube, a lamp, and a camera. This is the 3D modeling and 3D animation one, or side of it. So you can come in there and you can modify the cube if you wanted to create models. You know, nothing too special, but this is not something that we are here for. So in order to get Blender into the video editing tool set, the easiest way is to come up here to this little dialog box up here right next to default, and then go down to video editing, and it'll change the layout completely. Now mine, I have this properties tab here. Now initially you won't have this, so if I come through and I get rid of it briefly, I could show you kind of how to set that up, because I highly recommend having it. Now, come on, hello, join area. Oh, it's not gonna let me yet because this is not exact. How about now? No. Okay. Maybe we'll try it here. My editing layout will be the same with this properties window. Anyway, say you didn't have it. You come up to one of these on both sides and you drag out like that. And you want to get those exactly vertically aligned, because then you'll come and get a double arrow. If you right click, you can go join area. And then the arrow will point at which window will overtake the other one. So in this case, the window on top will overtake the bottom one, and up here, even though there's no arrow easily displayed, it'll be the other way. The bottom will take over. It doesn't matter which one you do, because then you could come down here and go properties. And now that window is there. And this, part of the reason I recommend having this is it tells you what resolution you're going to render out in and what percent. Oftentimes it'll be set like this, where it's 50% of the resolution you've got, and you want that at 100. Next, importantly, you want your frame rate to match your file. You want it matching it exactly. I'll load in a file to demonstrate in just a moment. You want this set to H.264, you want MP4, and you want audio set to AAC. Right down here. If you don't, because this I believe will be default to none. In that case, it won't render out any of your audio at all. So if you render the video out and your audio's gone, chances are this is what's happened. You want that set to AAC as per YouTube's recommendations. I typically don't change the bit rates in here, partially because I don't want to, mess with it. My recommendation would be to go to YouTube's help page and see exactly what they recommend for your for the file for uploads. And I will be doing that in the near future and making a little cheat sheet to leave on my desk for that. But at the moment, I just wouldn't touch this. So with MP4, H.264, frame rate matching, you are ready with most of the settings. Just make sure the resolution's matching. 1920 and 1080 is 1080p. You can change this to whatever you want, and it'll scale accordingly. And this is the video preview. This is a graph editor, mainly only used for animating. For video editing, I haven't found really any purpose for it, and for reducing file size especially, I see no reason for it. Next thing you'll want to pay attention to is the timeline down here. This is the length of which you will record. And this will depend on your file size. And it displays it here, in my case, in the lighter gray area. The dark gray over here and the dark gray over here, it won't render. And this is visible by the starting frame of 1 and the ending frame of 250. If you increase that or decrease that accordingly, you can see how that's moving. Now, in order to import, you'd right-click in the channels, usually. In this case, it doesn't want to. Oh, no, you don't right-click. Excuse me. No, not. Alt-A will play it. So Shift-A. Yep, you can go do Shift-A as the keyboard shortcut and go Movie. Or you can go down to Add Movie. Either way works, and it'll pull out a fairly robust file system. My recommendation is to also pull it up in your file settings. In my case, I'm going this direction. Now, I've got to find exactly where they are. Elgato captures, raw MP4, and I'll just pick any one of them. It doesn't really particularly matter, and it'll take it a moment to load it up because I've got a lot of videos in there. Oh, perfect. So, I don't know exactly which one to pick, so we'll pick this one. About 1.55 gigs before, and it's a 16-minute video, so it's a competitive match. If you double-click it, it'll naturally open up here. Oh, look, this one has some hideous doubling up. You know, as you can scroll through it and see sort of what happens. This one is a victory. Cool. So, say we want this video to be the one. You can either drag it into Blender into that scene view, which is probably the easiest way, or you can come up here and take the file name, and you put it in the top bar. The bottom bar is going to be the file name, and the top bar is the directory. So you paste that in there, and it'll change it and say, here's what everything is in here, and it won't show you, the thumbnails by default. By adjusting these settings, you might be able to find out which one it is or isn't, but that's why it's hard to use that one. So I would advise just clicking and dragging, and boom, there it is. Now it shows up in Blender here, but you see it goes beyond the ending frame. So if you rendered it out, in this case it would render it to this point. It wouldn't even get past the splash screen, or the competitive team matchup screen. So in that case, I advise using the mouse wheel to scroll all the way out, coming down here to the very end of it. And the only reason that the end of clip doesn't work is because it's going to the very end of the recording section. So in this case, it's going to 250, frame 250, and it's stopping. The easiest way to fix this is to right-click either one of these, because they should be the same length if you've got the frame rate set properly. In my case, we do. So by doing that, you can come down here. If this isn't visible, and chances are it might not be, pushing N will make it appear, pushing N will make it disappear. On the other side, you can drag this plus sign out there, and it'll pull it out. And what you want is a length. So you want it to start on frame 1. You could go Control C. In that case, it's Control X, and come down here to end, and Control V. Once that's done, you'll see that the active area is there. And if we go end here, it goes to the very end of the clip here. So by doing so, now it'll render out the entire thing. One thing I advise doing is, because it'll load these two strips in. One is your video and one is your audio. I would recommend finding the one that's sound, and you right-click to select. Don't forget, left-click will just move the playhead around, which can get frustrating if you don't know why. So it's right-click to select those. Now, if you click and select on the one that's a sound type, I actually advise scrolling down here, and it can take a moment for this to happen, but selecting Draw Waveform. Now, it'll take a while, but then you'll see the waveform of the audio in this little bar, like that. And that'll help you distinguish which one is the audio, which one's the video for future reference. Use Backdrop simply puts this behind the frames here. It does nothing else, and as you come through, it will do the same thing. With this setup, it doesn't really matter because we've got this window up here, so I usually have that off. For demoing it, I would have AV Sync on only when you want to comb through it and see where the audio is coming through, just to make sure if something's in sync or not, to find a good place in the video to test that. Otherwise, it'll just get annoying as you're scrubbing through it. So, playback AV Sync isn't necessary, and now that we've got it off, of course it's going to misbehave and actually do that for me. Oh, no. AV Sync you want on. My mistake. It's audio scrubbing. That's the one that will disable that, as you can see here. So you have that on or have that off, depending on what you want to do. I typically have it on just because it's one of the ways that I make sure that everything's working throughout the video by combing through it. But then, playback, have frame dropping on, because unless your computer is a stupidly overpowered computer, you are going to have dropped frames as you're going through it. It's video editing. It's going to require a fairly hefty amount of power. So, if I go and I just play the section of this...
Right, guys, I want you... Oh,
Teacher.
that is highly loud. So what I'll do is I'll fix that by coming up here, right-clicking the sound, scrolling down, and you should see a volume. Drag that to 0, from 0 to 1. You know, going beyond 1 will gain it, make it louder. Going below 0 or going below 1 will make it quieter, of course. But by having it at 0, there's no audio, so I can continue to talk. And you look, my computer's not all that bad, and when it plays it normally, it runs at a good 60 frames per second. But as the video editing is going on, it's down to 10 seconds, and it's red in this counter saying that it's running at fewer frames. If you have if you have, let's see, what is it, AV Sync on, it will keep the audio and the video in place. If you don't, it'll play the audio just fine because audio uses less bandwidth than the video. So it'll play the audio just fine, but the video will lag behind or jump around, and it can be hard to pinpoint it. So I do recommend coming in here and having frame dropping and AV Sync on for those reasons. Now beyond that, once you've got everything set up this way, it's basically ready to go. So my advice is also look here. Right now it's set to /temp/. That's where it's going to save it out initially. So if you come in here and you say, I want it to save to the desktop, and then clicking in the bottom right, so remember, the top line here is the directory where it's going to save, and the next one here is going to be what the file name is. In this case, I'll call it test, and then click on accept. And now that that's in here, this will tell you how it'll save it and where. Once that's done, making sure everything is correct, I advise saving the file before you render it, because if it crashes, you lose everything, and you would have to start from scratch. If you save it and the render crashes, all you have to do is attempt to re-render it. And if you're having issues with it continually crashing, you can actually render it out as a sequence of photos first, or go into your file where it is set to render it out, and grab those. But in order to do that, you want this set up to render it out probably as a PNG, but you could do a JPEG as well. And what that would do is, in this case, it would render out 58,000, almost 59,000 images into a folder, and they would be called something along the lines of just 001, 002, 003, all the way up. And that could be useful if it's continually crashing, because then what you can go in and do is you can load in all of those PNGs and the video, and then you can trim the video to where the PNGs end, and you don't lose all of your progress that way. Because you can then do the same thing for the sections that it didn't render as well. So you can set the start frame to whatever frame it crashed upon, and then render out the next section. So then every crash doesn't actually lose you progress. Again, I only recommend doing this if you're having issues getting it to fully render, but that is a backup plan. So initially, having all these things set up is the best way to do it, and then to go save, standard Control S will save it, or you can go up File, Save as normal, and choose where you want to save it. Top is directory, bottom is file name. Now, keep in mind for Blender files, they will have the extension of .blend. You cannot get rid of that. So if you kill it here and then you save it as untitled, it'll save it on the disk as untitled.blend. Blender is just .blend is Blender's file extension. It uses its own sort of proprietary thing to save them in. Aside from that, you don't need to really worry about that, because it'll allow you to open it up. And if you have it saved and it crashes, open up the .blend and you can resume right where you left off. So my advice there is definitely save it before you attempt to render it. Now, once you've rendered it out, it will usually drop the file size pretty substantially, which is a worthwhile thing to note. So in this case, the video was 1.5 gigs roughly, just over. It would probably drop this one to about 0.5 gig, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. So it does a pretty substantial job at cutting down the video length. Now for me, even that 0.5 gig would take several hours to upload. So by doing this, I'm shaving off several hours on the upload, and the quality doesn't reduce much, if any at all. Plus, it gets formatted in such a way where you have control over many of the different elements of that, so you can tell it, hey, look, I want you to upload it with such and such settings that YouTube has specified to hopefully make the upload go smoother for you. So once you've done that, we'll just say I did. you'd come up here and you'd click render. And instead of render image, which would only render a still frame here, you'd actually want to say render animation. I know it's a movie, and it would technically be just rendering a clip out, but you want that set to render animation. Now, do keep in mind again that if you don't have an audio codec set, preferably to AAC down here, but if you have it at none, saying render and animation will only render out the video. And you'll have a video file with no audio. Not any background audio, not any voice channel audio, it doesn't have any audio whatsoever. So if you want to have the audio, make sure you have an audio codec set. Now, if you do have to go through that and create the the slideshow effect, where you render out PNGs or JPEGs, and then you stack them in there and you import a bunch of PNGs into the file instead of a movie file, I would recommend also pulling in your movie file and just clicking audio up here to render, because this will render out the audio as well for that length of time. And then you can import the audio that renders out plus the PNGs and images, and there's a little bit less that it has to process at a time because it's only taking an audio file as opposed to trying to render out a movie file without the audio. So that is a great way of splitting the audio and video if you need just the audio. And then from there, render them together. So more than likely you won't need to do that, especially if you're not playing games while you're rendering, which will dramatically decrease performance if you're using the same machine that you play games on and you're trying to play the game at the same time the render is going. And that's usually why I also won't do it. Now, as you see, I've got two property windows up here. They display the same exact settings because they are just drawing from the same thing. If you want to get rid of something and they are equal size, don't forget right click and you could go join area. And then as you see, the arrow will tell you which one it will keep. So in that case, we'll keep that. And now, as I drag this back over, if you want to view something in full screen to test it first, you can hover your mouse over that window and go Control up arrow, and it will make that the full screen. And then conversely, Control down arrow will drop that back out. And that same thing goes for this window. Same thing goes for every window here. Control up and Control down will zoom in and zoom out, respectively. So beyond that, that's all you really need to know to do video editing. Blender has a lot more that it can do, and it's a lot more powerful software. So 3D View, it can do animation, compositing, it can make games, but it's based on Python, and it can't use particle systems while in games. So Blender's game engine really isn't all that good, especially in comparison to things like Unity and Unreal, which can be obtained for free, especially for learning. So Blender's game engine is almost almost a useless feature. It's kind of a legacy thing. It could do motion tracking, and it can do some editing and some scripting, but it will do the 3D animation. It'll do 3D modeling. It'll do unwrapping. It'll do so much. It could do the video editing stuff here, and it's open source and it's free. Blender is available at blender.org for free download, and they give you the source code saying go nuts. Gotta love the software, but it does have a pretty steep learning curve. So I know we went pretty quick here, but hopefully this helps you guys, and let me know how things go. But from here, this is how I render out the videos and how I make them smaller in file size so that it's lighter on my internet and they can actually upload with and not take 10 years. But yeah, thank you for that, and we are good to go. So have a good day, night, whatever it might be when you're watching this video.